All right, so in today's video, we are going to be discussing the 5 most disappointing quarterbacks of this past NFL season. Now, usually when I do a top 5 video, I literally will pull up the NFL standings, go through each of the teams for the video idea that I have, just go through, and if a name pops to my head after reading through the names, I write them down. So, writing down these names, I'm not going to say some of these names are solely on the quarterback's fault. There's could be outside factors as the team organization. There could be outside factors that is literally out of the quarterback's control. But just based off of how the season ended for each of these quarterbacks, and it could be as a whole, these teams, I wanted to go through the 5 most disappointing quarterbacks in the NFL this past season. Coming in at number 5, we have Trevor Lawrence. And I know that's a bit harsh to have Trevor Lawrence on a top 5 disappointing list when he was a rookie quarterback in a terrible situation in Jacksonville, with Urban Meyer as your head coach, with an offense that wasn't very good, and an offense that was never utilizing its weapons properly. I get it. I get all of that. This isn't squarely on Trevor Lawrence. The only reason why I have him on here, and as I mentioned to start this video, it's because I literally just go through and if I see a quarterback in the standings, I'll check it off and I'll be like, okay, we'll talk about that guy. But the reason why I have him on here is because we never really saw that generational talent that everybody raved about when he came out of college. We didn't really see that until the final week of the season. But now that we've seen it, we know what Trevor Lawrence can be. Now this video, it's disappointing, so in a way it's negative. But if you look at the positives, he was the number 1 overall pick. He was able to now get a Super Bowl winning head coach as Doug Peterson as his head coach now. So I think Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars are in a solid spot. Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawrence, we know the talent he can provide in the NFL. That game against the Colts, and it was a meaningless game. They had no pressure on him, but he still played a fantastic game to end the regular season. It was disappointing that we didn't get to see his talent all season long, but late in that season and the last game of the year, Trevor Lawrence showed what he was made of. And he has no more distractions with Urban Meyer. Hopefully the Jaguars get their things together, get some help around him so he can succeed. So next year, I think is going to be an eye-opening year for Trevor Lawrence. Next year, I think we'll truly see what he's made of. He has a great head coach, and we saw the talent that he does provide. So Trevor Lawrence, number 5 most disappointing quarterback. But again, I don't think it's completely on him, but it was disappointing to not see that talent all season long. Number 4, again, another one that might be harsh, and one that's not completely his fault. It's Lamar Jackson. Now, the reason why it's disappointing, he was injured, and he was injured late in the season, and he couldn't stay healthy as an illness. Like he was sick all the time. Now, he did have some good games. I will stand by the fact that I think Lamar Jackson is a bit overrated as a passer, but as a running threat, he is one of the most dynamic runners in the NFL, running back, quarterback, whatever position. So I'm not going to take away his running ability from him whatsoever. Lamar Jackson is one of the most deadly runners in the entire NFL. But he also had a career high in interceptions when he was healthy. Now, if he was healthy all season, would they make the playoffs? I fully believe that the Ravens would have made the playoffs, and I really do think they're going to be back next year. The Ravens, I hear this take all the time, and I think I agree with it. They are the most consistent NFL team since their franchise opened. Whether they were with Joe Flacco or Lamar Jackson, it doesn't matter who the quarterback is. They play great defense, and they have an offense that will always at least get the job done. So the Ravens, as a consistent organization, I think Lamar Jackson will be back, but it's also disappointing because Lamar Jackson wants to get paid. And those injuries and his illnesses making him miss games, I think definitely made his season a bit more disappointing, only for the fact that he's also getting paid. If he wasn't looking to get paid this offseason, I don't know if it was as disappointing as a season, but the fact he wanted to get paid really puts this season down on the pedestal of a good season for Lamar Jackson. He only threw 16 touchdowns in all the games that he did play. So there was times where Lamar Jackson showed he was a great passer, but then there was times that he wasn't necessarily, the most elite passer in the NFL. If he can, I'm going to stand by this take that I have. If he converts just a few of his rush attempts into passing attempts, I think Lamar Jackson, if he can finally wants to become an elite passer, if he can just convert some of those rushing attempts into passing attempts, I really do think his arm could be a deadly weapon, because we know what he can do with his legs. Now let's see what he can do with his arms when they really, really need him step up in big games. He did it against the Colts. Now let's see if he can do that more consistently. Coming in at number 3 is Russell Wilson. Now I think this just has to do with the lack of success that the Seattle Seahawks had this season. and coming in with all the noise that came in with Russell Wilson. I mean, it's Russell Wilson, so we didn't make that much noise last offseason, but I mean, that's the most noise you're probably going to hear out of Russell Wilson. The fact that he wanted out of Seattle last season, came back, it was a disappointing season. Even when Russell Wilson was healthy, they were 6-8. They finished 7-10, I believe, on their season. So it was a very disappointing season. Now, again, he couldn't stay healthy. Injuries are going to come down to a lot of things on this list. But the Seahawks, Russell Wilson, they finished the season with great back-to-back wins. But their receiving corps, DK Metcalf, yardage-wise, was very down on his production. He wasn't even a 1,000-yard receiver. So the offense at times really, really struggled. Now, I will stand by Russell Wilson has one of the most beautiful balls of anybody in the entire NFL. The way he just rainbows that thing is just always impressive. But we know what Russell Wilson can be. He starts off the season, he's a guy that's never received an MVP vote, but he starts the season as a guy who comes out swinging, looking like the MVP for the first, month of the season, and then he falls off. I think you can say Russell Wilson is kind of a disappointing quarterback in a way every year because he can never keep that high level of play every single game of the entire season. Starts off hot and then falls off. So I think for Russell Wilson, I think this is a great year for him to go back to Seattle. I don't think there really is a reason for him to leave Seattle. I mean, I think they're bringing back Pete Carroll. They probably will. There hasn't been any rumblings really of Pete Carroll leaving. I think it's because last year he was injured. It was just a disappointing year all around. It should be one of those last ride things for Seattle. Come back and let Russ cook. Let him have an entire season of him throwing the ball, show what he can be made of, and hopefully he can play at a consistently high level for an entire season and not just a month of the season. Coming in at number 2, we have Baker Mayfield. Even with the injuries, this was a very, very disappointing season for Baker Mayfield. Yes, again, like I said, he was injured. He got very injured early on in the season, but this team had very high hopes coming into this season. They were considered a top Super Bowl contender at times last season. Heading into last season, that's what everybody was talking about. The Browns are going to go to the Super Bowl, and they didn't even make the playoffs. They came off of a great playoff run last year where they destroyed Pittsburgh. That game really wasn't as close as the final score says. They dominated Pittsburgh. They were close to beating Kansas City. So this year we expected a lot out of the Browns and Baker Mayfield to lead them at least back to the playoffs. Like that should have been a focal point of the Browns for years to come, is making the playoffs. But the injury to Baker Mayfield, the issues with OBJ, Jarvis Landry not really being the most productive guy on that team. So there was a lot. It was very disappointing for Baker Mayfield, for a guy that's supposed to be considered one of the top tier quarterbacks, and he just could not help his team go to the playoffs again. And I know he had an injury, but I'm pretty sure the injury was on his non-throwing shoulder. I don't think it hindered him nearly as much as people that defend him do. Because it's an injury. I'm not going to downplay the injury, but I still think if you're going to play the entire season knowing you're going to need surgery, I think everybody expects a little bit more out of you and a little bit more wins and a little bit more great high-level play for a guy who came off of a great season the year before. And he's also a guy who really wants to get paid. And after last year, I think not only the injury disappointing part of it, but it also, the injuries are going to not allow him to get paid now. Because, as you could argue if he deserves to get paid or not, if he stayed healthy all of last season, or if last season he just got surgery immediately, maybe he does get paid. But he played an entire season while he was injured. Yes, he was injured, but that also hinders his ability to get paid in the future. And coming in at number 1, we have Carson Wentz. I'm literally putting him here on the list because he single-handedly ruined the entire Colts season. First of all, he made some of the biggest doy plays of all time. Like, there was points in the season where I literally wanted the NFL to ban shovel passes. Like, Carson Wentz was throwing some of the dumbest and craziest and weirdest interceptions I think any of us have ever seen in NFL history. Like, this dude somehow one-upped himself every single interception of making one of the dumbest interceptions I think we've ever seen. And the Colts, late in the season, literally went from a team that nobody wants to play in the playoffs to losing in Jacksonville in the final week of the season and not even making the playoffs. How do you do that? That's pathetic. And now the Colts are mad, and it may be a reactionary move, and they may not have a better option, but they're mad at Carson Wentz, and I think rightfully so. They had everything in front of them. They started off the season slow, and they were right on track late in that season to make the playoffs, and they completely blew it in the final game of the season, where Carson Wentz was bad. Carson Wentz was pretty bad in a lot of games this season. But, I mean, they have a great defense. They have a great running game. It's their quarterback who held them back. And it's impressive how a dude can one-up himself every single interception, throwing another bad one after another bad one. I think you can argue that Carson Wentz is single-handedly responsible for the Colts not making the playoffs, and just his level of consistency of throwing terrible interceptions. I don't think that gets talked about enough. Like his consistency of bad and terrible, awful throws. Like it got so bad that anytime there was a bad interception, we're like, oh, that was a Carson Wentz. Matthew Stafford, I think, did it against the Titans. Kyler Murray, I believe, did it in the playoff game against the Rams. Like anytime it happens, we're like, okay, that was a Carson Wentz kind of play. So Carson Wentz single-handedly caused the downfall of the Colts, a team that literally went from the most dangerous team to play in the playoffs to not even making the playoffs. But those are my top 5 most disappointing quarterbacks of this past NFL season. Give me your 5 most disappointing quarterbacks down below, and I'll see you in the next one.